Thank you, Joy. Look, the history of coronavirus research globally doesn't start in 2020. It actually starts well before that. Let's go back to 2011 when the research arm for the United States Department of Defense, called DARPA, poured in $33 million dollars into then CureVac's initial attempts at looking at an mRNA vaccine, which is what ultimately led to what we now know as Moderna's vaccine attempt. Let's go to 2016 and 2017, for example, when the National Institutes of Health, which is the research arm for the United States government, poured in millions of dollars to understand how to target spike proteins. Those spike proteins that look like crowns are what gives coronavirus its name. And that same research is also in the same patents for Pfizer, in Moderna, in CureVac, and so many others. I mean, it's very clear that the United States, at least the United States taxpayer, has poured in millions of dollars into this research. And that's not just where the story stops. Now, if you look at what we've done globally, look at BARDA, for example, which is the United States research arm for the United States Health and Human Services, has poured in $14.5 billion already into coronavirus research up until this point. And that's just the United States, right? The EU and the UK both have poured in billions, in at least 1 billion into what is AstraZeneca's attempt at a vaccine. The facts are, I think, very clear here. I think the story of how much money from taxpayers have gone into coronavirus research long before the pandemic started, and that will continue long after it, shows that there is a public stake in the ownership of this vaccine that's going to be developed. So the question isn't how much money have we poured in, and what is owed for the public at large, but what are the legal tools for public servants to do their job to put people at the fore of the pandemic, right? So there's one attempt at this, right? Compulsory licensing, which allows for governments to forcibly manufacture third-party versions of the drug, the vaccine, depending on whether or not they need to, right? So an example of this is in 2001, during the anthrax scare. The United States government was faced with pharmaceutical company Bayer, which was at the time manufacturing ciprofloxacin, which was necessary to combat the anthrax scare at the time for people. It was being manufactured for less than $1, but it was being sold for $2. And the United States government couldn't handle this. So they threatened compulsory licensing. And that is what turned Bayer down and said, okay, we're going to deal with the United States government. The EU and the WTO have both recognized compulsory licensing as important legal tools when ensuring that a coronavirus vaccine is affordable to everybody, right? And that's just compulsory licensing. Think about in the United States, we have another law called the Bayh-Dole Act, right? In return for clearing the path for private patenting of taxpayer-funded research, this law has provisions for governments to march in on patents that derive from taxpayer-funded research if a pharmaceutical company has not made that technology available under reasonable terms. Now, reasonable terms, by all intents and means available at affordable cost. Now, we have an example of a company having to backtrack on this very point. Look at Moderna, for example, talking a big game about pandemic pricing, right, of their vaccine when people were scared that the pricing of the vaccine would be too high for people. In their SEC filing soon after, they had to state that we cannot be certain that we were the first to file for patent protections because the NIH, the United States public arm, actually claimed joint ownership of the IP, right? So governments are taking unprecedented steps already when they don't want to, even sometimes, to ensure that they recognize that the public have an IP stake in this. And so the question for us really is, what are we going to do about making sure that a vaccine is affordable? I think everybody recognizes the importance of pharmaceutical manufacturing, pharmaceutical cooperation and partnership, and they should make money on this vaccine. There's no doubt about that. The question is how much, and recognizing whether or not they are the priority, or is the priority the fact that vaccines don't save people's lives? Vaccinations do. And I think recognizing that public leaders are at a crossroads, a crisis that they're probably never going to face after this ever again. The history will judge the actions that they take right now. Do they make sure that vaccines are free, that they don't bankrupt small and middle income countries, that they're affordable to everyone, and that we ensure that equity as the central helm of a pandemic response to a global crisis?
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.